we have like a one-page strategic plan. It really outlines things, make it very clear. We spend a lot of time on that because it really starts to get the owner and entrepreneurial brain, on a piece of paper that they can communicate to the rest of the team.
Welcome to a brand new episode of the M&A Mastermind podcast presented by Cornerstone International Alliance. I'm your host, Nick Olson. On this show, I get the opportunity to talk with the brightest minds in lower middle market M&A. Together, we discuss industry intelligence, deal management, shared successes, specialized expertise, and much more. If you serve the small to medium-sized business owner, this show will offer you tactics and insights you can use and implement now to become a master in M&A. All right, Jason, for our listeners, just to kind of set the tone of the conversation today, tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah. Background, like you said, it's been about 20 plus years in tech and real estate. Worked for big companies and small companies, but my passion is really in the small to mid-sized companies. I was part of one that was, aggressively going after growth. We did that and we exited higher than industry normal, averages when it comes to valuation. And the process that we went through utilized a lot of the four disciplines of scaling up, which I know we're going to get into today. Also went to another organization that did the same process, but we did a little bit more turnaround. We kind of changed the strategy. Again, we'll talk about that as part of our methodology and really positioned a different type of company that when I came on board and when we exited, what that looked like. And again, sold for a higher than normal valuation. Stuck around with some strategic buyers for a little bit and went through an IPO and then also a spinoff. So kind of seen a lot of different aspects from mostly the seller side. And then obviously on from a buyer standpoint, we've gone through targeting organizations to increase the value and really provide some additional capability within our product as we were growing. Super excited. I think can't wait to talk more about my background and my process or my process, but the scaling up process that we went through in my experience.
Well, yeah. Tell us about scaling up. What is scaling up and what is that core problem that you guys help solve for small to medium-sized business owners?
Yeah, so scaling up methodology was founded by Vern Harnish over 30 years ago. And really it was, what are those four disciplines that every small to mid-sized large organization needs to really scale? And not just to scale, but to connect that business of where they're at and really extend beyond that. We feel that our methodology and our framework allows organizations to 3x what their current revenue is today. Framework is really based around four key items and disciplines. One being strategy, which is making sure that where are you going? We've run into a lot of entrepreneurial people that are starting their business or startups that are in that initial stage, and it's they've got the vision in their head, but how do they communicate that throughout their organization? And that's really setting the strategy and making sure that you've got clear goals and those are communicated throughout your organization. The next component is really people, is really making sure that, you've got the right people doing the right things and they're focused on the goals of the business. And again, finding the right individual with the right skill set that can deliver consistently on an ongoing basis is a big problem that we see facing all kinds of different size organizations. The next component is really, okay, now we move into kind of execution is how do I get a high performing operating, company to really execute at a high level to make sure that you can achieve those growth goals. And that is really execution. And that is everything from putting together, weekly and monthly and quarterly goals, as well as daily huddles, and really kind of structure the business so it has upward and downward communication and is very effective in terms of looking at how do you, look at your processes and how do you get that continuous improvement going. The fourth component is really, which I think is the major differentiation, and it's one of the biggest challenges that I see in small to mid-sized businesses. And that is, if you are going to grow, or if you are going to invest in changing your business or upscaling your business, it's going to take cash. And the problem that we see right now is small to mid-sized companies have a real, they might have the greatest idea, the best people, but they don't know how to generate money or cash to really to support growth or maintaining that business trajectory, right? So the biggest thing that we see there is if you don't have it, where do you go get it? And that is you're going to go to private equity, you're going to go to maybe a bank or whatever, and what you're going to do is end up giving up a percentage of your business to basically fund your business or your growth. And at that point down the road, that's where we see that maybe businesses don't get the value, or the owner thinks that they're going to have this great windfall and retire successfully, but then they find out that they've given away half the business, and they can't reach their personal goals, and now we've got a problem, right? So if you look at those four disciplines, those are really the core principles of scaling up. And our coaching organization, which you mentioned is about just under 300 people worldwide, supporting a lot of the small to mid-sized businesses, and we engage in those companies to really put and utilize some of the tools within our toolbox to make sure that they have what they need to grow and continue to increase the valuation of their business.
So your coaches, what is the DNA of a successful scaling up coach? Because like we were talking offline too, that scaling up coaches, our audience M&A advisors, we're all working with the same towards helping the same client. So, what does that DNA look like for a quality scaling up coach?
Yeah, I will say to me, it's our coaches are really, if you look at the ideal coach for us, it's somebody with a lot of business experience. They've been a former CEO. They've been on the management team. They've gone through an exit. They've gone through, some kind of transaction. It's really somebody that can really, lean in on and specialize in, we say all four disciplines, but there's always a passion behind one of the four disciplines with our coaches. Some people say, hey, I'm a chief, HR officer. I really lean in on the people side. I get that. I really want to make sure that, I think everything they look at through a lens, it's a people issue, right? At the same time, financial people tend to look at cash and they say, hey, I feel comfortable with cash. But when you become a certified coach for us, we teach all four disciplines. It's kind of that's base level knowledge that all of our coaches have. Is we teach them tools in all four. It's just when they go into their different industries or different geographic areas, there might be one thing that jumps out more than the other. And we really want our coaches to lean in on those areas. Some of the international coaches, they might say, hey, it's more of an execution problem. We've got some people that are in the services industry that might think it's more of a people issue. But really, all of our, all of our coaches are really focused on those four key disciplines. It's just how they apply it to those businesses that they serve is really up to them.
And you mentioned that most of your coaches are former business owners, probably have gone through an exit. Why do you think that is so important to be a successful coach?
It's business is not, open a textbook and go to page 1, page 2. And it's not if everything was the same, then, everybody would be super successful in business, right? The reality of it is if you leverage the tools that are in our toolbox and our, that we bring, through our coaching, practice, and focus around those four disciplines, there are some science to business, right? But it's the art that our coaches bring with that business experience and that acumen that they can draw on, and that community of coaches and those community of those, potentially 7,000 other, small businesses that have gone through. That's really what I think sets us apart. We always say we try to meet our customers where they're at. Today, if I'm, just a startup, maybe it is delivering and coming up with a very crystallized strategy, right? If I'm growing and I'm now got to, push that down from that entrepreneurial to a management team, well, hey, I got to find a really strong management team. And that might be my biggest thing today, which is a people issue. Maybe I'm past that. And now I've got to get into how do I really start to operationalize and build that efficiency and those systems and those processes. And maybe that's an execution problem. Or today, hey, I got to make payroll. It's got to be a cash issue, right? So really, it's how do we lean in on, and our coaches engage in those small to mid-sized businesses, I think is real key to making, what we bring to the table. It's just not so prescriptive. It's really more adaptive to basically where the businesses are at today.
Yeah, so it sounds like you really work with business owners at all different phases of a business life cycle. Like I said, it could be a startup, it could be someone ready for an exit, and everywhere in between.
Yeah.
What type of business owners are you working with, and what does that look like from a a profile perspective? Like how big are the, because we said small to mid-sized business owners. Like, can you define what that looks like a little bit more for our listeners?
Yeah, I think it plays pretty well with some, size of businesses that we even have with, our partnership with you. And
Mhm.
it's really, if you look at the ultra small, which is probably that 5 to 2 million, they read the books, they might go to a webinar, they might, participate in some online learning for us. That's not really who our ideal coaching client is. Once you get to that, and I always use revenue, and it's probably not the best indicator because there are some people that have small companies, but a large capital expense and vice versa. But typically that 5 million to 500 million that's the bell curve for us. That's our sweet spot. And it really is about how where again, those are the typical businesses that say, hey, I'm outgrowing my knowledge source and I've got to bring on an outside or a third party, or I need tools, I need things to help grow my business. And in many cases, what is missed on a lot of that stuff is that's how we get engaged. But one of the first questions we always ask is, I'm always a big proponent of working with the end in mind. And is like, where are you really wanting to go? What are your personal goals? What are your corporate goals? And you get all kinds of things. I want to retire, I want to hand it off to my kids, I want to sell for x millions of dollars or whatever it is. And I think that's really, if we always start there and we say, okay, if we understand where you're going, and if you're using the framework of scaling up, then we can help accelerate that and get you to that finish line with a higher valuation much more effectively. And also from a buyer perspective, they're going to look at you as, oh, you've got a really good handle on your business. You've got all the boxes checked, and that's where you get a premium value versus just saying, hey, look at our revenue and it's going really good. But that there's a bunch of spinning plates or band-aids on the back end. They're going to find that out in due diligence. And I think that's where we see a lot of these businesses maybe not get what they want, or they might get an initial offer that's high, but then as through due diligence, they really beat them up. And really what we're here to do is to support that box. All those boxes are checked, and that seller has a harder time to negotiate and also to drive up the valuation because you've got all the check boxes earmarked.
When talking to your coaches and maybe just in general, what are you guys seeing? Any common themes as to where you see business owners getting stuck more than, are there any common themes there that would be good for our listeners to know? Like, hey, we see a lot of business owners struggle with this or that. Any common themes you see?
Again, I go back to the four disciplines. They're always stuck on one of those four things.
Yeah.
98% of the time, it's I just I'm starting up, and it all depends on the maturity of that and where they're at. And usually, there's different revenue ceilings that they hit. Again, they have an incredible entrepreneurial guy, but he's used to doing everything himself. Now, how do I start building that team, right?
Okay.
Or a team that might have team dynamic issues going on, and you've got 80% of the right team, and then all of a sudden now you've got some there's some just tension or political or even maybe a skill set issue that's holding them back. Usually when we go into our discussions and we have our workshops and we have our management team things, we really try to understand and flush those out. Let's keep everybody honest in the same room and figure out how we can move forward, and maybe where the reinforcements need to be put in, new processes, new tools, or things of that nature to really help move that organization forward. I don't know if it's really one thing. It's it all depends on the industry and location too. Some are more sensitive to geopolitical type of situations, others are more sensitive to I can't find good people. Other people are saying, hey, I've got operational things, I just can't get what I need when I need it. It really varies. And I think, again, if I look back on the differentiation of our methodology and our framework, it is that adaptability when we go into a client for the first time is you do hear some common themes, but at the same time, they're always tell you. They'll say, man, I got an issue with this.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, let's start there, right? And that's usually where, we like to start, is if the customer or that client doesn't know where to start. I think, we've got a methodology around that too, but we always say, usually there's something that keeps them up at night, and we just try to identify that and then really start the engagement and start working toward that. And then you develop into all the other 4 disciplines, because at some point in time, one of those things are going to come up as they continue and grow.
Yeah. Like I said, you've been talking a lot about your 4 disciplines, and it's, your methodology is all around those 4 disciplines. When you're looking at working with a business owner, and maybe it's a 2-year, 5-year, 10-year, horizon or runway to work with them, any specific tools or things that you guys do that you guys use on a consistent basis that really helps drive higher valuations, or better quality of earnings, or even just reduce that owner independence?
Yeah,
Or
I think
owner dependence, I should say. This episode of the M&A Mastermind podcast is powered by Cornerstone International Alliance, where leading M&A firms come together. As part of this international network, you get access to global opportunities, over 200 M&A experts, enhanced collaboration and knowledge sharing, and some of the best M&A tools and resources available, all to help you take your firm to the next level. Ready to join this exclusive network? Visit cornerstoneia.com/new member today.
Right. I guess the first thing is like you said, is what's that time frame, right? Is really try to identify that. And that's usually done through a lot of our assessments and our front end stuff, right? Again, what is that owner's goals? What is the goals of the business? What are their current KPIs? What is that baseline, right? And that's really just trying to understand, what we're dealing with, right? Because some people, what we see all the time, and you guys can probably relate to this, you get a phone call and say, I'm ready to sell my business. And when they go to say, hey, okay, well, let's take a look at your revenue. Let's take a look at your people. Let's take a look at how you're executing. And then they realize, holy cow, there's a lot of gaps there. And the reality of it is they're not ready to sell or get the valuation that they're looking for. So we need some of that lead time to make sure that all those things are in place to really drive a true better than average, valuation, right? So I think if you look at, the tools that we use a lot of things like, the assessments I talked about. We have like a 1-page strategic plan. It really outlines things, make it very clear. We spend a lot of time on that because it really starts to get the owner an entrepreneurial brain, on a piece of paper that they can communicate to the rest of the team, right? We have different tools like, agendas for daily huddles and weekly and quarterly check-ins. We have standard API or KPIs for, different types of businesses that, that might be focused on, is it utilization first, or is it days outstanding, or, what are those things that are going to be really critical to drive cash, execution, better people, or to the strategy component. So I just can't emphasize enough. And like I said, for the people that have gone through or trying to prepare for some kind of life-changing transaction or exit, or whatever that future finish line looks like, is you don't prepare on the day that you start the race. You got to prepare to run the race. And I think that's really where, if I look at scaling up, we're here to make sure that when you run it, you can run it at a world-class pace and finish strong, so to speak. I know that you guys, I don't want to take your term, but
Yeah.
I do believe in it.
Scott would love that you use that term. It's a good analogy. You're not going to run a marathon and just go and do it. You're going to train
Yeah.
many, many weeks in advance, even years in advance.
Yeah.
And I think that definitely holds true to what you're talking about here is,
Yeah.
and rarely do you find a business owner that's ready to sell, or is the business is ready to sell when they're emotionally ready to sell. Like a lot of times those things tend to not line up. And then, you have to work with, coach your coaches to kind of bridge that gap. And I know when you hear Scott Bushke talk, our founder, he talks about that wealth, that lifestyle number. What are you going to get for your business? Now, if it's less than what your ideal lifestyle looks like, then you got some work to do. If it's the other way around, okay, now you might be ready to sell, and we can move forward. But it all starts with that conversation, you said you got a couple of forms that, and tools that you use, but it also, helps to get, a valuation, or we call it a real market analysis, to understand the value of your business. Talk about that a little bit, and getting that and what the importance of it and how it's helping your coaches, kind of, plan out the strategy and the timeline of, what their clients need to do to get to that number that they want and need.
Yeah. Well, as you know, one of the biggest things or misnomers or myths or whatever you can say is when you ask an owner or a founder how much your company is worth, I would say 9 out of 10 times they're always wrong, because they always put it at the high end. Oh my gosh, my company's worth $1 bazillion, right? And the reality of it is, until you get a third party and a standard way of scoring that and looking at that from a variety of different angles, like you said, whether it's emotional, whether it's financial, whether it's logistical, whether it's structural, whatever that is really truly the value of the baseline that you're talking about, right? And I think once you can get that level set there nailed and say, if this is what the market is telling me, and this is what all these professional advisors and consultants are telling me on the outside, then how do I get there? Because I know when you guys do your analysis, it's very clear that their shortcomings are going to be, usually there's going to be a list, right? That's the list that we feel that we can address to really increase that valuation together. And I think that's what makes our partnership really strong, because it's, very rarely the owner says, well, my company's not worth anything. And, it's like, well, yeah, it is. But it's usually the opposite. It's, hey, it's worth, 10 times more than they think it is, because that's the lifestyle that they want afterwards.
Right.
But they don't, again, how do they get to that finish line? There's got to be a systematic approach. And I think that's where we come in.
Yeah. And you mentioned, the relationship between Scaling Up and Cornerstone. And this is something that, every party, all parties involved have worked very diligently to make happen. And essentially what it is, and I'd love to hear your perspective of just the partnership and what that means for the client and for both entities. But it's really bringing two disciplines together to serve the client the best that we know how. And so how do you see that this partnership, working and benefiting not only your coaches, our firms, and then ultimately the business owner?
Yeah, I'm going to start out with, when we were looking at partners and going out there, one is who really, whose sweet spot is that small to mid-sized business, right? I think that is the first, criteria. The second criteria is who has really, consistently executed on these transactions. There's a lot of people who say, oh, I'll help you, I'll do this, and they do probably one deal a year, right? Just the sheer volume of Cornerstone and CIA that you guys have executed at a high level. The other thing that really, I guess, drew me in was with Scott's, when he referred to POMO, the power of multiple offers. We saw that firsthand in my first organization that we were with. There's a great story behind this. I'll share this, a lot of the details maybe for another call. But it really went into, if you get, we had a lot of the boxes checked, right? Very diversified revenue, consistent recurring revenue, people solid, execution right on, strategy documented, cash on hand. All the boxes were checked on that. So when we went to the market, there's always the strategic buyers and the private equity buyers. It was very apparent to us that private equity just wasn't going to be the right buyer for us, that we had data, IP, all these other criteria for increasing our valuation that we kind of planned for as we were moving toward that finish line. Once we got to the finish line, it's like, man, you put it out there, and all of a sudden we had a lot of people come, to us. It was, some people were looking at us because of our data. Some people looked at us for the market that we serve. Some people looked at it for our partnership. Some people looked at it from our brand of customers. So we could basically go to the market and reach a much broader purchaser or buyer. And at that point, it really allowed us to, start the, I won't say bidding process or auction process is probably,
You
guys got better terms than I do on that. But it was really just putting ourselves in the best position to accommodate a broader market and also to get a higher valuation. And I think that's really what, that was, I was living and breathing that every day. And I think that's So that partnership that you guys offer, I think if we can help, cue all those, and set that customer up for having all of the diversity and all the, the boxes checked to increase their valuation, then again, I think that's where Cornerstone and CIA can really take that to the next level and bring in multiple offers and bring in those different buyers. And that's why I think this partnership is so strong.
Yeah. And I'll add to that too. And very well said, Jason, that, both entities have an international presence. And, I would imagine that was, another big thing
Criteria.
for
Yes.
synergistic reasons why, scaling up and Cornerstone and CIA, made a lot of sense is because, we have, coaches and firms all across the world, which has been huge. And, the one thing that we always say, for a firm that benefits our clients is, with 35 firms in our group and growing on 5 different continents currently, that, not only do we have boots on the ground in many different parts of the world, but also, we have deep, vast industry expertise. So if firm A over here as a client that maybe, hey, I've not done many deals in that space, but, this firm over here that they're partners with has 20 deals closed, like that synergy between the two are going to be, where now they can serve that client to the best of their ability. So, but also when we have a partnership with scaling up, where, and this kind of leads to my next question, is, we see business owners, we talk to them all the time, like a lot of times they're not ready. And so having a partnership with you guys where we can send them over to you to get them to that number that they need to get to before they're ready to sell. And then, we can work together to get them there and then work together to sell that and help them, hopefully with the biggest financial transaction of their lives is a great synergistic relationship as well. So my question to you, Jason, the long-winded way of saying, what should our firms know? What should M&A advisors look for and know? Maybe some signs or some things that, would be a good referral back to, to over to you and your coaches to get them ready. Obviously, the pillars that you talk about, we look at kind of the same things generally speaking, but, what are some things that we should look for? What are some reasons or good situations where we can, send those clients to you and your coaches?
Yeah, I think it's a couple things that we're always going after the same clients with is, what's their time frame, right? And what's that ideal end state look for that individual? And then it's really as simple as it sounds, what do they think is holding them back to getting there, right? Some people say, yeah, I want to sell mine now, but man, I've got, I want this one last purchase order because then I can get my valuation up. Or, hey, I got to, bring in this one, I got to get a new CFO, or I got to, whatever. And it really does come around one of those 4 disciplines is what I see is, yeah, if I just could, have a, I'm kind of growing right now and we're driving by the seat of the pants. We just don't know what the next 1 or 3 years look like. Let's find a way to, flush that out with them. Right. Or, like I said, it's, hey, we need to hire that CFO or add to our management team so we can be more attractive and more of a professional looking organization. Okay, great. Around people or execution and then the cash percent, how, where are you making those investments? How are you, are you living from, payroll to payroll? Are you, setting aside, making those right investments to increase valuation, right? So when you're, I guess talking to your clients, they're gonna say, and I think your advisors are great at this, is determining, are they ready? And if they're not ready, then what's holding them back? And I'm guessing that is really when to engage, a scaling up coach. And again, if you can, qualify even further down to say, what are one of those 4 components, that's at least we know where to start, when we come in. We know that they're going to go to a finish line, but at least that gives us some heads up, just like, you guys want to know when and the type of organization, the revenue, and EBITDA and all kinds of other financial information for valuation. We just, are a little bit more on the front end of that stuff.
Yeah. How important is that valuation? Let's say, because a lot of times that's the entry point for us is get that valuation,
Yeah.
understand the value of your business, and then
Yeah.
we can have a conversation from there. I would imagine, and maybe you have an example of a coach or in a situation that it's been nice to have that ahead of time because I would imagine you could do a lot more from the coaching perspective once you have like a full valuation done.
I think that's a great place to start, to be honest with you. Again, it's not emotional. It is a very financial look at it, and it really identifies a lot of the gaps, to be honest with you. What is their monthly recurring or their annual recurring? Is it a cash, position? Is it, and just really some of the other components that really, when a buyer looks at you, what are they going to look at? Everybody looks at the financials first. Send me over your financials and we'll take a look at it, right? So it's making sure that those are rock solid, and also it's not an owner's opinion, it's not an owner's thought process. It's basically a hard number, and at that point, usually, that's, again, if that is the target, and if there is a gap on getting to that target, then that's usually where it's a good time to bring in a coach, because I think we work with a lot of um, partners like yourself, or financial institutions, as well as, and the owners are always asking for that. They're looking for that trusted advisor. They're looking at, somebody to kind of take them through that journey. And that's really where I think the coaches are, because we're aligned to really, again, get that customer to a finish line. And the quicker that we can do that, the more systematically we can do that. That's really the value that, I think we can bring.
Yeah. And creating a strategy for someone who has a valuation compared to someone who doesn't. I mean, you're essentially, it's a shot in the dark. It's more subjective way to look at it than now we have this objective measure. Like, my business is valued right now at $10 million. Whether you want to get 20 million for it or you wanted to get 5 million for it, depending on your business, you can kind of pivot. But having that just that valuation and to understand and guide you, whether it's from the M&A perspective or from the coaching side of it, I think would be
Yeah.
far more valuable and advantageous to have that done.
Well, I'll even look at it from our perspective, right? When we get in front of an organization, and you hear a number from an owner, and you look at their businesses and it's not ready to sell, the first thing that I would like to say is, hey, listen, don't believe me, the coach. Don't believe, let's go and get a third party valuation and let them go, let's figure out what that baseline looks at, because everybody might, look at the business differently too. Some people might be revenue generated, some might be profit generated. So if you're going to get the multiple offers, the POMO, then really you've got to be able to, take a look at, and truly do a third party valuation. That it just, I think it's a great starting point, because, again, like you said, it takes out the subjectivity, the emotional aspect of it, and it's really, and if you've, with your track record, and that's the other thing with the partnership that we lean in on, is, again, the coverage, the global nature, and just the amount of transactions, the experience that you guys have is unmatched as far as dealing with these types of organizations. And I think it's a perfect place to start, both of us start.
Yeah. And not to toot our own horn, but you brought it up, so I'm going to say it. We last year the Alliance closed over $2.5 billion in enterprise value in deals last year, and our record year as a group. So like I said, the expertise, the experience is there, and having that validation from an organization like yourselves is amazing for us, just because now two strong organizations coming together to serve these business owners, working for one common goal, I think is going to be amazing. The possibilities are endless, I think, between our two organizations, and really looking forward to what the next 1, 2, 5 years looks like. From your perspective, Jason, what does that future hold? Anything, take out your crystal ball. What do you guys have coming up in the future? That maybe that you can share that you're working on that might be like, hey, this is amazing. I want to work with one of your coaches.
Yeah, I will say it's a lot of it has been based on a lot of your research, a lot of what we're researching, which is, we do know that there's a huge transfer of wealth coming. We do know that there's going to be, believe it, whatever numbers you want to say, 48 to 52% of the market is, in our market, is going to be looking to exit or, get out of their business over the next 3 to 5 years. So if that is kind of a macro trend, then from our perspective is how do we lean on that? How do we help that? How do we get those companies that are working with us, making sure that they get the highest value and be in a position to be to stand out more than all those other companies that might not have a very good structure or strategy. So you can continue to do it your way and maybe get a number that is okay, or you can really, lean in on, I think this partnership and what we bring to get you really, that not only goal, but achieve even higher than what you expect. And I think that's really what gets me excited. I've seen it when, all the stars are aligned and the business is running. It's really hard during due diligence for people to poke holes in you. And it really shows that, like I said, you've got an operating model and a strategy and the right people, and really not only just go to the market and get what you're looking for, but to prove to the market that you've done a great job as an owner, entrepreneurial, and founder. So that's I think what our coaches really get excited for. That's the validation, is seeing that them cross the finish line and achieve those goals.
And that's what it's all about, helping them get across that finish line and go on to the next phase of their life, happy, financially able to live their ideal lifestyle. And that's why we do what we do.
Yeah.
Jason, thank you so much. This has been an amazing conversation. I know, me personally, it's been great working with you and your team. Excited at what the future holds for scaling up and Cornerstone together, and ultimately for our clients. And so thank you for joining. Where can our listeners learn more about scaling up, or maybe connect with yourself?
Yeah, I would say if you want to go to scalingup.com, that is, I guess, one of our premier pages. You will see, coaching offered. You'll see upcoming events. Vern Harnish does publish his books. He speaks at over 150 venues across the globe every year on this very topic in our framework and our methodology. If you want to reach out to me, I'm available on LinkedIn. You can also follow Scaling Up Coaches on LinkedIn as well. I would encourage all you to do that. And, we'll look forward to connecting and seeing how we can accelerate your business and increase that value and get you that retirement that everyone deserves. Or across the finish line. I guess maybe that is probably the better way.
Finish strong, right? We're going to help you finish strong. Yeah.
God's going to call me on that one, I'm sure.
All right. Thanks, Jason. And
thank you so much, Nick.
And that's all we have for today's episode. Make sure to like, share, and comment on this episode. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and pass this episode on to anybody who think might benefit from our conversation. A coach, and an M&A advisor, a business owner, anybody who think could benefit from this conversation, make sure that they see it. And tune in every Thursday for a brand new episode each and every week. Thank you, everybody, and take care. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the M&A Mastermind Podcast, and a special thank you to our presenting sponsor, Cornerstone International Alliance. If you enjoyed today's discussion, don't forget to like, share, and comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. We'll be back next week with more insights, strategies, and real-life experiences to help you take your M&A game to the next level.